This is the Neurosurgery Podcast.
Welcome back to the Neurosurgery Podcast. JP and I want to wish you a happy new year. It's 2026 now, and we are super excited to have back on the show longtime guest, many-time guest, Andrew Chan, otherwise known as Chanimal. Welcome back, Andrew.
Chanimal.
Thanks, guys. Good to be back.
And if you don't know why they call him Chanimal, ask around, because Andrew is a true legend already, even though he's only 4 or 5 years out into practice at Columbia University doing neurospine. But today we want to tackle the very fractious topic that I hear all the time, which is, are there too many medical meetings? And by this, we can talk about all the different kind of meetings, that are out there. But basically what people are talking about is the meetings that are national or international, like NAS or AANS or SRS, right? So when we kick this off, Andrew, why don't you clue us in on about how many medical meetings you go to, maybe a month or a year. And again, we're not talking about like a hospital committee where you walk in with your coffee for 30 minutes. We're talking about where you're getting on a train or a plane or driving a good distance. How many meetings you go to on average?
Yeah, as of right now, it's at least 1 to 2 times a month.
Wow. So you're taking about 25 round trips a year just for work?
Yes.
Wow. And can you just give us like a quick list, like just like in the past recent months, where you've been traveling to and how much time you spent on it?
Well, just off the top of mind, went to CSRS, went to CNS. Fortunately, some of the meetings were local to New York City, so I kind of got a couple that I didn't have to travel far for. One was the NYC Minimally Invasive Spine course Dr. Roger Hartle puts on, and then also the International Spinal Deformity Symposium that Dr. Larry Lanke puts on. And those would have otherwise been 2 meetings I would have had to travel for too.
Yeah. And you've been lucky. There've been a whole slew of meetings in Manhattan, which is wonderful. We haven't had many in Manhattan before because it's so expensive. But, luckily you're in New York City, so you're at a giant airline hub, 3 or 4 major airports, pretty easy for you to get to most places, probably the easiest city to travel from in America. And I want to get your first opinion on this before I kick it over to JP. Like, do you think, and you're going to a lot of meetings, right? More than the average neurosurgeon. Do you think it's too many?
I think it really depends on the person. I think for me personally, I would say no, I don't think there's too many. But I think you have to make sure that all the meetings you go to are doing something for you, right? And if you find out that you're going somewhere, you're bored, you're not engaged, you're on your computer answering emails, those sorts of things, then maybe it's not good and there are too many meetings. So I think some of it has to do with intentionality as well.
Yeah, on that theme, I want to ask you, these meetings you're going to once or twice a month, traveling so much all year, what proportion of those meetings would you describe yourself as purely attending the meeting versus having some role in the organization, either generally or like, you have a position at that meeting, you're on a subcommittee, you're running this event, you're actively doing something versus purely going to be a recipient of whatever knowledge or information is being presented?
Yeah, it's tough now. I mean, with how many meetings there are, with those 1 to 2 a month already, I mean, I have to be a little bit more selective. So basically, if I don't have a faculty role, if I'm not speaking on the podium, if I'm not, moderating something or leading a course or a symposium, I can't go. I just don't have time for it right now.
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's gone through an evolution. Before you joined on, JP and I are ranting about COVID, right? And one of the secrets the hospitals discovered, I think, was that they don't want us to travel, right? They want us at home operating, seeing patients, doing consults, and the like, right? Because they're making money off of surgeons. And when you're away, they either have to gap fill you or they're paying for you not working there. And so have you sensed, like, my feeling is that post-COVID, there's been a real clampdown on travel across the board.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think generally that's the temperature across, what my colleagues are telling me. It's harder and harder to travel, and I think part of it's COVID, part of it's, just I think the reimbursement landscape right now. But overall, you have to make, your living, right? And it's hard to do these because a lot of times these are not things that you get reimbursed for. And so, there's a big cost.
Yeah, I want to ask because for me, it's interesting to have the two of you uh, participating in this conversation together because both of you go to a lot of meetings, and you're at very different stages of your career. I remember just last August, I was at the NREF spine course at the Barrow in Phoenix, and Dr. Sandor Connolly was there, and he was talking about getting involved in organized neurosurgery. And he talked about not really doing that until fairly later in his career. And so, Andrew, I wonder if you could talk about how you've been able to carve out that time. Because as we were just saying, you're in the first few years of practice, you want to be operating, you want to be seeing patients and stuff, but you're able to carve this time out. Like, are you just sleeping 2 hours per week and you've achieved a nirvana state of maximum productivity, or how do you square that both with your family, with your department, and with your own psychology to be able to have all these plates spinning at once?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it takes a lot of time, and it reminds me of what my dear friend Dean Chow, one of my partners, has said, and my friend. Basically, when you're saying yes to something, you also have to remember you're also saying no to something.
Yeah.
And so if you do that, if you have the column A and the column B, then you realize how many things you're saying no to, right? And exactly as you say, one, your patient, cases that you could be doing, or research, your lab meetings, the grants you could be writing, or your family, most important, right? I have a little baby girl at home now, and so that's top of mind, thinking, oh, I'm going to miss this, I'm going to miss that. She's babbling now. And so it's a big cost, but I think, what you have to realize is, and how I justify it to myself and how I think it's worthwhile, is it is symbiotic to the practice. I think especially for someone at my career stage, that basically it was very important so that patients, surgeons, referrers knew exactly the kind of surgery I do, right? So, I don't think if, people didn't see my operative technique videos on, minimally invasive deformity and how I do lateral surgery and these things, that people would, oh, this is the guy actually in Columbia Neuropresbyterian that does these things. And then, oh, I'm going to send the patient to her. And after, seeing, the data, seeing my talks, there's been people, right? They send me patients from across different state lines, these things, to get those patients in, right? Because they know, oh, this is the guy that does that surgery. So actually, I found it super symbiotic because, to kind of go backtrack to Mike Wang's question, how does the hospital deal with this or whatnot? I think they recognize that it's so important for the reputation of the place, but not just reputation in this abstract, but it's how you get more patients, right? They realize the specialty care you're giving, and they don't do that from a vacuum, right? Let's talk about Mike, right? Like, you're awake spine surgery, right? I mean, if you just waited to talk about that the first time you published like a peer-reviewed paper, that lag is huge, right? Even just if you publish the first day you did a manuscript, it's going to be years later. And then finally, if the first person I see that on my desk, if I open up the journal and I say, oh, I'm going to try that, as opposed to the first time, we're walking by and I say, oh, Mike's doing this. What's your anesthetic protocol? Tell me about this and that. And then I can implement that at my place. These are the sorts of things you can do from your conferences as well. And so I just find so much, good actually for your practice, for the practice of surgery, case volume, these things at your center, that actually it's symbiotic and not, at odds with each other.
Yeah, Dr. Chan, I like how you bring that in, is that the meeting does a lot of purposes. One is connection, another is information sharing, another is building trust, another is learning, right? There's so many aspects, but I feel bad for you, and even worse for JP, because I will tell you, like, I finished in 2001, right? And traveling back then was a very different proposition. And, you talked to like Praveen, one of your mentors, Chris Shaffrey, and other mentors, and we're always talking about like double diamond, Delta status, or executive platinum, or 1K, right? And back then, like in 2004, like you're like exec platinum, right? I've been exec platinum for like 25 years. It's like, wow, you actually get upgraded. Yeah, the flight attendant comes over and like they know your name. And now it's like I feel like I'm the only business traveler in the plane. Like everybody else has all their kids in first class, and like I'm like the only person in a suit on the plane. And I'm like, oh my God, like this must really suck for you guys that are traveling a lot. But and I don't want to have you necessarily double down on the commentary because everybody knows how crappy it is flying nowadays. But I actually had a system for traveling because I want to know what your secret is, because there are people listening right now who are struggling. Like, I try to go to a meeting and something happens and I can't do it, or something comes up, or I couldn't plan it properly, or whatever. And I would, at USC, I'd operate on Monday and Tuesday. I'd do full clinic on Wednesday. Then Thursday, I'd go to Rancho. So in other words, I'd be in town for the 2 days post-op for my patients. Then almost universally Friday, I'd be out. I'd be flying out on Thursday night or Friday morning for the weekend. Of course, then I'd miss my family, but I missed very little of sort of like work, right? Do you have a system at Columbia that lets you travel that frequently?
I think the thing that I have to mention is, it takes a team and it takes good partners. You know, when I'm out, there's a whole system in place, someone, that's going to cover if there's any emergencies, of course, whether it's my partner, Dean Chow or Paul McCormick or Chris Mandigo, these individuals know that, this is part of the gig, and they're very supportive of me. So yeah, I wouldn't be able to do it without them. And I think that's very important to say. Obviously there's nothing like a patient having their own surgeon. And I always tell my patients, when I'm traveling, for example, that I tell them, hey, I have to go to this conference. I tell them before surgery too. So it's not something that they just learn about afterwards. And, they always have the choice to, pick a different surgical date if they're not comfortable with that. And, fortunately, a lot of the surgeries I do are either, same day surgeries or, one night stay surgeries. So it's not a big miss as opposed to, something where they have a week long stay. And let's say I'm at an international conference. So, I think it's part of, the practice I have specifically, but also the very supportive team of partners I have.
Yeah, so I wonder if we could break down what exactly all these meetings are. And obviously, you're just one surgeon going to this stuff, so this is not going to be a representative sample of the meetings that everybody tends to go to. This is just the world of the chanimal. But I wonder because it seems like part of if we were to call it the problem, the too many meetings problem, if we're just going to use that language, part of it seems to be a proliferation of different courses and groups and subgroups and subcommittees and joint things that have proliferated in the past few years, few decades. And so I wonder if we could break down, you don't have to name organizations, but of the meetings you're going to, you said you have a role at each one, be it a talk, be it some work that you're doing. But how many of these meetings per year are, say, repeats with the same group where you're meeting again to touch base? How many are international? How many are national level? Could you just give us a sense of, if you're flying out once or twice a month, how many of the same people are you seeing? What level are these meetings that you're able to do it so frequently?
Yeah. No, I mean, a lot to unpack there, but, I'd say,
Yeah.
mostly national meetings, national level. Again, with already going one or two meetings a month, it's hard to get to some of the regional meetings unless you're really on my doorstep. And, it's a lot of the same people I'd see at the bigger conferences anyway. About two international meetings a year, I'd say on average. And then, there's just there's so many different roles in different meetings, right? Every society has a different mission. And some are more academically focused, some want to to really talk about research, others are more advocacy based, right? Some are entirely based on a single surgical procedure, right? We can talk about the beginnings of ESMIS, not beginnings, but SOLAS, right? Society of Lateral Access Surgery, right? That was only a society to talk about lateral surgery, and that wouldn't have existed, one, if we didn't do lateral surgery, but then two, there's a huge need for that, right? Because we're doing a new technique. We don't just want to follow the hype. We want to make sure that we're doing this safely. We have good long-term outcomes. We're talking about the nuances. We're talking about complications, So these are all very important. That's why there's so many different societies.
Yeah, and if you were to put it on a like a platter or like a cafeteria selection of food, it's almost like the more desirable the meeting is for you personally, the more time you're away, right? Like like you want to go, like I've got a meeting coming in Peru. I'm like, oh geez, that's going to be like 4 days away, 5 days away. It's a lot of time away, but then I kind of really want to go, right? And then you have another like local, like a Florida neurosurgical, nothing against it, but like lower priority, but it's just a short drive, right? So it makes it very hard because then everything seems not equally attractive, but very attractive. I feel like I don't want to miss out on these meetings.
Right. And there's a lot of that fear of missing out, I think. A lot of the big things, right? Our field is built on this, spine surgery especially. We are an innovative field, and the best way to share innovative ideas is at these meetings, or the fastest way, right? And you don't want to be stuck as a laggard, waiting, 3 years to then see the first peer review publication on this and then maybe pick it up. You want to do the best thing for your patient right now, and these meetings help you do that.
Just an aside, Amy and I always joke that in any given year, except for maybe one or two COVID years, I did more dinners out with your mentor Praveen than with my own wife. It's
Well,
very scary.
it's funny that you mentioned the FOMO and you mentioned COVID because as you said, Dr. Wang, we were kind of chatting before we started this recording about the effect, one of the infinite effects that COVID had on our field. And specifically when it comes to travel and these meetings, I think part of that, I mean, obviously, many people talk about the FOMO effect of social media and virtual interactions, but one of the many effects that COVID had, both on our interview process for residency, but also on attending meetings, was that people shifted to virtual attendance. And so, Andrew, I wonder if you could talk a bit about how many, how many things are you doing virtually as well as these actual physical travel that you're doing, but more so, do you think there's more pressure to show up more and participate more because there's the option of just zooming in? Or do you think that for you, maybe that's less attractive and what really counts is showing up in person and being face to face?
Well, it's interesting because I think the pendulum is swinging a bit. I think, the high time for this was definitely, in the wake of COVID. But I think societies are seeing, and as I'm seeing, anecdotally, that your engagement just isn't the same when you're doing these virtual meetings. And the
Agreed.
tough part is it takes just as much time in some ways, right? I mean, the meeting time, I'm not talking about travel or these other things, but at the same time, you're getting less out of it. So then it can seem like more of a time sink, right? And you can make it start to feel like maybe there are too many meetings. Because I think that's part of the issue, right? And we touched on it a little bit earlier. Is there's this whole notion of I'm at the meeting, and what am I actually doing here? Am I getting something out of it? And if you're the person that's not engaging in the Q&A sessions, you're not standing up at the microphone, or you're super passive in your attendance, right? You're just on your laptop or you're on your phone. You could be watching like a ESPN highlight, and you're not listening to what the speaker's saying. And then you finally like leave the conference. You're like, God, what a waste of time. And then so I think the temptation for that, or the ability to have that creep in, is much worse when it's a virtual meeting, right? I don't know about you. I mean, right now I can already see I have like 25 tabs open on my Chrome browser here. So, if I'm bored, you're not talking to me, I was like, oh, you know what? I wonder is what's going on with that game right now. Let me click on that. And then now I'm watching game highlights and not listening to this at all. I think it's a major issue. So I think, that's why I've really shied away from it. I mean, the reality is when you're doing 1 to 2 meetings a month already and you are trying to be a steward, you really don't want to travel. So sometimes it was a, thankful alternative that like, hey, at least I can just do it virtual and, participate in that way. But, I always liked it a little bit less than being in person.
Yeah, I'm gonna dovetail on that with a bit of a rant about these virtual meetings, and this is not now the national meetings per se, but a lot of the work that happens for them, but also the local and the hospital. This idea that like they put something on your calendar with a calendar invite that's a Zoom or a Teams or a Google Meet or whatever the hell it is, and then they just push recur. And then it's like a weekly recurring thing. And then you join on, and then people like show up when they want. And then half the time the organizer's not there. And it's become like I look at my calendar like that is the one most undesirable thing I see pop up on a calendar is this kind of like a virtual when maybe like a couple emails will take care of this thing. Now you want to block off an hour of my day to go like me watch you drink coffee, right? Like this is for a surgeon like one of those maddening things because we see all the people working virtually while we were operating during pandemic and now post pandemic and people making a lot of money virtually, but like we have to do surgery, right? So we're wedded to that. And it's like being a plumber, right? Like I absolutely abhor those and then oftentimes they've canceled the meeting, but they don't even cancel the recurrence. So now it's cluttered your calendar, and you can't even know can I? And we're too responsible, right? We're too diligent. We're like, should I? I really should join, right? And that's the thing to me. I don't know if you have that problem, Andrew, but you were kind of touching on it a bit.
Yeah, no, we have that problem a lot. And the hard part is we're the super busy, right? We're either doing cases, we're in clinic, and then of course, the a lot of the people we meet with and the stakeholders we meet with can only meet during business hours. So we're really struggling to find the exact time that threads the needle for everybody, including if it's multiple surgeons that need to meet. So I just it was top of mind. Dean and I had to meet about something with a couple other key stakeholders, and we found this one date, 6 weeks in the future that everybody can make. And of course, on that date, the key stakeholder couldn't make it, and Dean and I it was just wow, we will never get anything done. So I think yeah, it's been this crutch that seemed good, that was helpful at first, and then now it was kind of just used irresponsibly.
Well, I have a mini rant of my own about the recurring calendar event and the Zoom meetings, not for these actual organizations that you're motivated to do work with, but like the hospital committee X and committee Y. It's almost like Parkinson's law where work will expand to fill the time allotted for it. The more meetings you have, oh, you're on this committee, and once a week there's a Zoom link, and you log in for the hour, even if there's nothing to talk. This meeting could have been an email. This email could have been a text. This text could have been a word in the hallway. What are the odds that you're actually going to accomplish something? Well, if you have an hour a week, every week, forever, where's your motivation to actually get things done? If you even have a problem to solve, well, we can get to it next week. Well, we have a full hour to sip coffee in the screen like you talk about. And so there's no motivation to actually get things done and get on with your life because the teleology has failed. The purpose of that meeting is no longer to accomplish a task. Now, the purpose of that meeting is to have the meeting so that you can say that you've had the meeting. And it's just a performative circle jerk so everybody can pat themselves on the back and say we did something when actually you've done something in name only, and you have nothing to show for it at the end except having been on a meeting for an hour. So, with that depressing rant complete, I'd like to turn a page here and do what we always do when we have the channel on the show and talk to the young people. So now let's wrap this conversation up with a little mini episode of So You Want to Be a Neurosurgeon meeting attendance. And let's talk to the young person in the field as we always do. And maybe we could briefly go through different phases, but let's just talk about the stage of career that you're at, Andrew, where you're someone who's starting in the field, early practice, and you have a feeling like, I want to be more involved. I want to go out there and make a name for myself on the national stage to draw attention to my institution, my practice, like you said. That's a great effect of this. But also, I want to contribute to advancing the field, advancing our technique and technology, advancing our patient care. Maybe you could talk about some specific societies that are less obvious to a new player than the AANS, the CNS, spine section, but also how to think about selecting a society to give your time to.
Yeah, well, let's just talk to, let's say you're just coming out of training and you're starting out and you're saying,
Yeah.
Hey, Andrew Chan, why should I go to meetings? Like, what is the whole point of this? Well, I think there's a couple things. I think the first thing is that, you kind of have your academic reputation built at these meetings. You can do a certain type of surgery, you can give a talk to a referrer or a PT center or, whatever, and you can do that till you're blue in the face, but no one's going to know you do that. No one knows what you practice. And so this is the first time you're actually going out. People see what research you do. People see what technique videos you show at these conferences. People see what questions you ask, showing your domain knowledge. And these are all things that you're forming there. And so that's the best way, right? If you want to come out, you say you're a lateral access surgeon, or you want to come out and say you're an endoscopic spine surgeon, or you come out and you don't, you're not at those conferences, you're not doing that, you're not showing that, you're not researching that, then no one knows you're doing that. So that's the first thing. I think, you can write papers till you're blue in the face too, but that's such a delay like we're talking about. And that's why the meeting is kind of more real time. And also it helps you, stress test some of your ideas early, right? I love at these conferences, especially with minimally invasive deformity techniques, especially when I'm giving these talks in front of a bunch of open surgeons, it's great, right? They love saying, well, how about this? How can you do that? I don't believe it. And then you see that, and then you can engage them. You get their feedback. They see your feedback. You actually show them cases, and you kind of, people's minds are changed, right? I think even with a paper, you're kind of like, I don't know, and I can't ask the questions, so whatever, and you kind of just throw the paper to the side. That's a big thing. I think the other thing too, for the academic thing, is that this is where those multi-center research study groups meet, right, Mike? The JP, we're all there, and what happens is, QOD Spine Core, ISG, the meetings happen, and you need to be there. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to be part of this thing that's leading the cutting edge and making sure that you have good research to support what you're doing. Next thing is, I would tell the young person that the visibility matters, right? So if you're talking about, JP, you said, I want to change the game, I want to do this, I want to be an effectuator of change in the field. Well, you can't even be on the committees or these different things if you're not visible, right? It's that same thing we've learned since you're a medical student. How am I going to prep for my sub-I? Available, able, affable, right? And the most important thing is available. It's the same thing. You got to be present. If I'm not present, then Mike Wank's like, oh, Chanimal should do that. Oh, next conference, I'm going to have him do that. Or, if you want to be on the guidelines committee, you want to be a moderator, you want to lead a cadaver course and whatever. I mean, these are the times that people that are designing those courses are seeing you, and then say, oh yeah, that person likes being involved. Let's get them in. So I would say if you that visibility matters and you want to do that, then that's why these meetings are so important. And ultimately, to answer the question, I think some of these societies are based on techniques and based on innovation, and that's what our field, I think, has always been founded on. And I love that. A little shameless plug for our Spine Summit meeting this coming year. It's all about innovation. And so, there's things like ISAS. Mike, you have your leadership role there. About innovation. Talking about arthroplasty or the latest, navigation, the latest robotics. I think is very important. I think other things like lateral surgery, right, for ESMIS is some of the things I found most important, because these are the societies that I love AANS. I think CNS is very important. Everybody has their roles, but some of those things I think are more advocacy, kind of more big picture things. When we're talking about really dialing it in, and we have a whole conference on lateral surgery, right? How to do it from the side, how to do it with the patient in the prone position, how to adjust the psoas, all these different things. That's where a lot of the knowledge sharing happens and how we can really improve. And I think that's really important, especially when you're a new surgeon, right? And you're coming out there and you're trying to, obviously, you wade the morass of, all the things. You're like, hey, well, I know that, Juan Uribe and Neil Anand do things this way. Actually, I'm going to talk to them and say, hey, look, you say you do that, but what do you really mean when you say that? And you're not going to be able to do that on paper, and you're not going to do that. Well, now I can call them, but before, without having that relationship. So I think, that's one of the things that is very important. I think there's roles for everything, big picture, right? For AANS, CNS, for big advocacy that goes behind those huge societies, so important, right? I mean, we couldn't operate and we couldn't have a living without them. But then, outside of that, finding the different missions of these smaller societies, I think, are super important.
I love that JP brings it back to the bulk of our listeners who are younger. So let me ask you a question that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds. So you're a professor at Columbia. There's a young wannabe doctor or resident or even a college student who wants to come, be under your influence, or at least get to know you, right? And let's take out those guys that are kind of like a little bit stalky, right? Like this is someone who's a little bit more shy. How do you do the opener? What is the proper venue? Do they look you up and they say, okay, you're giving a talk. After the talk, I walk up. What's the proper decorum, right? For people to say, I want to meet this surgeon. Let's say it's you, Andrew Chan. I want to go meet this guy. Maybe, maybe I live in New York City, so I'm thinking maybe I'll get to work in his lab, or maybe I can interview for residency or something like that. What's the proper social way to do this, the opener?
Yeah, no, I think, especially this day and age when it's becoming more and more rare that you actually have proper time for Q&A sessions or big panel discussions and things, where I think that's very organic, right? You can stand up, just go on the microphone and ask your question. Then later that person will remember that you asked a question. Then you start this organic conversation. But short of that, a lot of times at these meetings, there's not opportunity for that. So I think something that does stand out, if you're the younger person saying, I want to meet Mike Wang at this conference, is wait till Mike Wang gives the talk. And then, especially if it's that one that, he doesn't have much time for Q&A, I think kind of wait at the back of the room, and then say, hey, Mike, I loved the way you talked about the MIS TLIF. I thought that was so cool, the way you do it with the little bag and those things. And, can you tell me more about this? And I think, again, it's a very good organic engagement that makes it so that, you tap into a couple of very important things. Because I think, we're now talking a little bit about what's the difference between what you're getting out of meetings when you're more junior, maybe what you're getting out of meetings when you're a little bit more senior. And I think the senior people want to get out of meetings that they're actually a good mentor, right? That you're actually helping people. You're going to make a mark on this field. So I think, it taps into that naturally when the young person's saying, hey, Mike, I really love your wake spine protocol. Do you use an epidural or not? And what's your anesthetic protocol? And you talk about it. And Mike Wang thinks, hey, this guy actually is interested in what I'm doing. And, hey, you know what, let's talk about it next time. And then, next time I'm going to have this conference on awake spine surgery, and this guy's now doing it. I remember when he first asked me that question, it builds this relationship. So I think that's the way that it happens very organically. I think that's a nice way. If you're at these conferences, in person, of course, go up to these people afterwards and ask them that burning question.
I love this advice, and I love this entire last segment of the conversation, because like so many things and so many lessons we've learned in the last few years, the best advice is ancient wisdom. Just show up, and then if you want to talk to someone, go talk to them. We used to, my whole, I always say this, I owe Dr. Wang my whole career, and all of this started with me just sending him a cold email and saying, hey, I read this paper you wrote, Can I Shadow You? And he, of course, gave me a giant Mike Wang speech about how he doesn't believe in shadowing. But that led to this entire fruitful relationship, working and friendship. And we used to call it the hot girl effect at the bar, where the hottest person in the bar never gets approached because everybody's too intimidated. And so then the one person who actually does walk over and say, "Hey, can I buy you a drink?" They have the opportunity because everyone else is too intimidated and too afraid to even say hello and approach. So I love this advice that if you want to break into the field, if you want to know someone, work someone, show up, go to the meeting in person, and just walk up with a good, reasonable question and engage. That is wonderful advice. And the Chanimal, you only come and give wonderful advice to people at every stage of life. I was trying to count. I think it's actually at least 6 times you've been on the show because we forgot your debut episode about the Tiger Mom myth. And
Oh,
so,
that's nice. Yes.
right. So you've been on with us so many times over the years, a wonderful friendship and a wonderful source of wisdom and advice for everyone from high school to attending hood now who wants to be and become the best neurosurgeon that they can. So Andrew Chan, thank you for coming back and ringing in our first interview of 2026. We love talking with you. You're doing great things in New York City. Keep it up.
Thanks, guys. Good seeing you again. Happy 2026.